This is an excerpt from my book, Traveling the Wilderness Road. By 1765, the entire length of the Great Wagon Road had been cleared enough to allow the transportation of horse-drawn vehicles. At Big Lick, which is present-day Roanoke, the route split. A lick is an area where minerals, especially salt, occur naturally in the soil. Wild animals often gather at these locations to consume needed nutrients. Several place names have been derived from such locations in addition to Big Lick, such as Little Flat Lick, which is present-day Duffield in Virginia, Salt Lick and Licking River in Kentucky, Big Lick in North Carolina, and French Lick, which is now Nashville, in Tennessee. One fork of the Great Wagon Road continued southwest to its terminus at Knoxville, Tennessee. The other fork went from Roanoke through Stanton Gap and on southward to the Carolinas and Georgia. This became known as the Carolina Road. It was along this eastern route that Squire Boone and his family, including his son Daniel, migrated to the Yadkin Valley of North Carolina around 1750 to 1752. Some accounts say Daniel Boone and a party of long hunters traveled to the Watauga Valley in 1760 after the birth of his daughter. At Boone's Creek, near current Johnson City, Tennessee, a tree stood for many years with D. Boone killed a bear on this tree in the year 1760 carved on it. The hunters crossed the mountains at present-day Damascus, Virginia, and entered the Holston Valley, where they encountered a pack of wolves. Boone called the area Wolf Hills. It is known today as Abingdon, Virginia. On December 1 of that year, Boone and some other members of the party, including Nathaniel Gist, stood atop White Top Mountain, where they were presented with a spectacular and no doubt inviting view of the southern Appalachians. Nathaniel Gist was the father of George Gist. The younger Gist was raised by his mother, who was the daughter of the Cherokee chief of the Paint clan. His Cherokee name was Sequoyah, which the whites called Sequoia. He is credited with creating an alphabet for Cherokee, the first written Native American language. The practice of white men being given a Cherokee wife was common, especially among the long hunters who spent months at a time in the Cherokee domain, which covered at its height 40,000 square miles. The standing of a man's Cherokee wife was proportionate to how highly the Cherokee viewed his social status. In the fall of 1767, Daniel Boone, along with William Hill and perhaps Boone's brother Squire, went a short way through Cumberland Gap to hunt. They traveled to the Big Sandy River at what is now Breaks Interstate Park. He and several companions returned to Kentucky to trap and hunt in 1769 through 1771. Although Boone's name is indelibly linked with Cumberland Gap, he was not the only guide who piloted settlers to newly available land, nor was he the only master woodsman, expert marksman, Indian fighter, or revered militia leader. His life was immortalized in the narrative published in 1784 that purported to be his autobiography. It was a mixture of fact and fiction, as was the television series Daniel Boone, which probably did more to confuse the public's knowledge of Boone than any other single effort. For example, Boone never wore a coonskin cap. Like other long hunters of his day, he wore a wide-brimmed felt or beaver hat, much like the Quaker-style hats worn by men in Pennsylvania, where he was born and spent his early years. Additionally, Boone was not as tall as a mountain, nor was he as tall as Fess Parker, the actor who portrayed him in the television show, who was 6 feet 6 inches. In reality, Boone was described by his brother-in-law as being 5 feet 8 or 5 feet 9 inches tall. On September 25, 1773, Daniel Boone and his family, along with 5 other families, left the Yadkin Valley in North Carolina for Kentucky. At Wolf Hills in Virginia, where he had visited nearly 13 years earlier, Boone sent his oldest son, James, age 16, and 2 other men to Castle's Woods, which is currently known as Castlewood, to pick up Captain William Russell, who was also eager to travel to the Bluegrass region. The main Boone party continued on through Moccasin Gap into Powell Valley, where they were joined by other families to wait for James and the Russell party. But Captain Russell was not ready to leave when James and his companions arrived, so Russell sent his son Henry and some other immigrants along with James's group. The rest would catch up as soon as they could. On October 9th, while the main Boone party camped at the head of Station Creek in Powell Valley, James and his group had to stop on the opposite side of Wallen's Ridge when it got dark. They made camp at Fannon's Spring on Wallen's Creek near current Stickleyville. At daybreak, a band of Indians consisting of Cherokee and Shawnee, and including Big Jim, who had been a guest in the Boone household, attacked James's group. Many of the party were killed. Others were taken prisoner, while James Boone and Henry Russell were tortured so brutally they finally begged to be put out of their misery. The 2 were then stabbed to death. Captain Russell's party later came upon the scene of the mutilation. A deserter from the main Boone party arrived at about the same time and went back to deliver the news to the rest of the Boone family. The Boone party turned back, and Rebecca wrapped the 2 young men in a linen sheet. They were buried together where they lay. All the travelers returned to Castle's Woods. The Boones spent the winter in an abandoned cabin at Moore's Fort. In 1774, a group of wealthy investors, spearheaded by Judge Richard Henderson of North Carolina, formed the Transylvania Company. In the fall of 1774, to handle the issue of Indian aggression, Henderson decided to approach the Cherokee directly and negotiated with them to purchase the land between the Cumberland and Kentucky rivers. Chief Attakulla, also known as Little Carpenter, traveled to Cross Creek, present-day Fayetteville in North Carolina, to meet with the company. The Cherokees agreed to relinquish their claim to a block of land approximately 2/3 the size of the current state of Kentucky. The Transylvania Company hired Daniel Boone, the white man considered to have the most knowledge of the existing trails, to assemble the Cherokees at Sycamore Shoals for the signing of the treaty. Sugunson, also known as Dragging Canoe, who was Attakulla's son, opposed the sale. When the land was sold, Dragging Canoe rose to his feet and proclaimed, "You have bought a fair land. When you have this, you have it all. There is no more game left between the Watauga and the Cumberland. There is a cloud hanging over it. You will find its settlement dark and bloody." The governors of Virginia and North Carolina later nullified the sale, but by then hundreds of settlers were ready to move to the frontier. Once the treaty was signed at Sycamore Shoals in mid-March of 1775, Daniel Boone and around 30 men, including his brother Squire, met at the Long Island of the Holston River, a sacred Cherokee treaty site located in present-day Kingsport, Tennessee. Each man was promised the right to purchase 500 acres of the Transylvania property at a fair price, if he would agree to raise a corn crop. There were also 2 women in the group who would act as camp keepers. One of them was Boone's 14-year-old daughter, Susanna, who had recently married William Hay, one of the axemen. Felix Walker wrote in his journal, "About the 10th of March we put off from the Long Island, marked out our track with our hatchets, crossed Clinch and Powell's River, over Cumberland Mountain, and crossed Cumberland River." The trail was widened in later years so it could accommodate wagons. It would become known as the Wilderness Road.